Hi guys, it's Stephanie Mo Davis. Welcome to my channel. My channel is dedicated to my awakening process that began in 2015, and it's a process that I'm very much currently in. And this channel is dedicated to my experience sharing with you guys, so hopefully to offer some assistance into things that worked for me and things that didn't work for me so well. Today I just want to give you guys a little more of a background and history about my life pre-awakening. Primarily in my 20s. I was pretty ill for 10 years of my life. At age 21, I was diagnosed with systemic lupus, which is an autoimmune disease. And the disease progressed really rapidly in me. And within 3 years, I was in full-blown kidney failure. I was probably 25 years old when I actually started my process with dialysis. And if you guys saw my last video, you may have noticed that in my left arm, I have a Gore-Tex piece of plastic that actually was implanted for dialysis. So if you ever see that, you know what it is. It was for my dialysis treatments. So for 3 years, I actually was very ill and being dialyzed every other day in order just to sustain myself. 3 years later, I was eligible to get a kidney transplant. So in 2006, I had my first kidney transplant, and fortunately I had a living donor, and I had really great success with my first transplant, and a lot of health and happiness and joy after that first transplant. The lupus went into remission immediately after my transplant, which was wonderful because the disease really was really tragic for me. I was really, really ill for about 3 years straight. So after my kidney transplant, I began living life again and enjoying myself, and that's when I opened my first yoga studio. Thankfully, I had yoga and spirituality in my life prior to getting ill with the lupus. It really helped me a lot, but also that was when my spiritual practice first began to transform. So my journey with yoga began prior to the diagnosis, and I was actually practicing Ashtanga every day, 6 days a week. And if you're familiar with Ashtanga yoga at all, it's really aggressive, not aggressive, but vigorous and challenging, physically demanding. And when I began to get ill, I just couldn't keep up with the demand of the practice. And my physical practice started to change a lot. And as I progressed with the disease process, it got to the point where I was in so much physical pain, I really couldn't practice whatsoever. So at that point, I realized, well, what am I going to do? And really, who am I? I was so attached to the yoga practice. Who am I if I can't physically get on my mat and practice? So at that time, I began a process with visualization and laying on my mat or sitting on the couch and visualizing my practice from start to finish. And at that time, I really got into spiritual books as well. I love Caroline Myss, I love Louise Hay, I love Eckhart Tolle, I love Abraham Hicks. So I started to really dive into the deeper philosophical roots of not only yoga, but just spirituality in general. And it really gave me a solid, firm understanding of how to cope with my illness, but also I took that much deeper because of my interest in yoga and healing and even science and the medical field as to why possibly my disease manifested in my body. So my first transformation and mini awakening really occurred through that process of illness into researching on how to keep myself physically well after my transplant. So I'm so grateful for my practice of yoga and the transition that it took and the change that it brought about with shifting my perception of yoga and really diving more into the spiritual elements. So after my transplant, I decided that I wanted to live my life a little bit differently. I not only wanted to have yoga be a part of my life, that's also when I decided that I wanted to open yoga studios and teach people and assist people how to cope with not only their own possible illness, but anything else they were going through in life, any sort of trauma, change, shift, and share with them the tools that really had helped me and the tools that I had learned and developed through my own illness. which was lovely. And I have such a lovely group of people and clients that I get to work with every day, and I'm so grateful. But during that time, I kept evolving and kept studying and kept growing, and I really just realized that my future and my life was taking a shape that, again, was just slightly different because of this passion that I had to and for helping people, but also in my own personal growth. So it was about 10 years post-kidney transplant. I do want to mention that I was married at that time. I had been married for 14 years at this time, 10 years post-transplant. And I thought that my life was going along rather well. I had a healthy marriage. I had a good, positive relationship with people in my life. My yoga business and studio was going really well. And I actually remember verbalizing one day, wow, I think everything's going really, really well in my life. I'm really happy, I'm really content, I'm really happy with the spiritual progress I've made. And I just felt this sense of proudness of where I was at in that moment. And at that moment, things actually began to shift. Right in front of my eyes. And it was in 2014, which is 1 year prior to the ambush awakening that I had in 2015, that I started to really have a higher sensory perception. I started to have more visions, more epiphanies through dream states. I was seeing things, I was hearing different things, and I was just having this overall sense, and I was expressing it to friends and family that something was going to happen. And I would verbalize that. Probably 6 months prior to the awakening experience, I told several people, something's going to happen. Something's going to happen. And I remember one of my friends saying, okay, what is going to happen? And I didn't know. I had no answer. I had no clue. I just felt this energy inside of me building, and I knew it was going to culminate to something, but I had no idea what was happening. There were some really cool things that had happened during that time. Maybe I'll share some pictures with you at some time. Just really interesting things had shown up in my reality that they were too hard to ignore. And I just didn't have all of the pieces to put together to explain what was happening. But I definitely knew something was happening, without a doubt. So in that knowing that something was going to happen, even though I had no idea what it was leading up to, it was clearly an excitement. There was a sense of safety. There was a sense of a looking forward to what was going to present itself. If I would have known what was going to happen, I might have felt immense terror and fear and confusion. But in the moment leading up to this, it felt great. It felt exciting. It felt new. It felt fresh. It felt like something that was going to be a big, important part of my future. And it definitely has. So that being said, I think I'm going to stop for today. I can share more with you next time. I plan on discussing the actual occurrence of the awakening and what happened. But until then, I just want to say thank you so much for joining me, and feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or if there's any specific topics you'd like me to discuss. And yeah, have a wonderful day. Thank you.